A man kneels in the middle of a muddy road, hands bound, face swollen and blistered. He begs not for mercy but for his daughter to be spared. The crowd around him does not move. They've already doused him in oil. He coughed once, just once, and in this village that's enough. A match is struck. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't cursed. He was just unlucky. And in 1349 that was a death sentence. Welcome to the year 1349, in a quiet medieval village where God has turned away and fear has replaced law. The Black Death stalks every street and every face. The church blames sin, the town blames each other, and one man, one poor, unlucky man becomes the sacrifice they believe will save them all. But fear is never satisfied, and flames only feed the plague. The village once called him the Strong One, broad shoulders, hands like tree bark, eyes always fixed on the soil. A farmer born of farmers, his name was Elias. He tilled the land with reverence, spoke little, gave freely, and buried his wife 5 winters ago under the old ash tree. Since then, silence had been his companion. He lived on the edge of the fields now, where fog gathered thicker and the birds sang less. That spring, the first rat was found curled dead in a water pail. Then another, belly bloated, eyes glazed. Within days they were in the grain sacks, scurrying beneath church pews, gnawing through the food of children. Livestock began coughing. Yes, coughing, and dying on the straw without explanation. Boils appeared on the neck of a shepherd's son. The priest called for fasting. The apothecary closed his shutters. The villagers whispered of the old plagues, the great pestilence, God's wrath. They prayed harder, but eyes narrowed across fences. Women clutched children tighter. Men stopped shaking hands. No one remembered when suspicion replaced community, but it had. Elias remained calm. He saw the rats too, buried 2 of his goats in the same week. But panic was for those who didn't know the earth. Illness was part of nature's rhythm, wasn't it? He lit no candles, made no noise, but then his child coughed. Once, a dry, innocent thing. But in a village like this, once was enough. The sound floated across the village square like a curse. A baker dropped her dough. A boy ran home without his shoes. The next morning, a bundle of herbs was left on Elias's doorstep, tied with a red string. Protective magic, they said. But Elias knew a warning when he saw one. At market, eyes followed him. Mothers pulled their children behind skirts. A well he had used all his life now had a strange sigil drawn on the stone lip. He reached to draw water, and a voice snapped, "Use the river." That evening his child coughed again, louder, longer. This time a dog barked from the other yard, as if it understood what was coming. The priest's sermons changed, no longer about mercy, but purity. He spoke of the unclean, of how sin and sickness walk hand in hand. He looked at no one, but everyone looked at Elias. One night someone carved a cross into the farmer's front door. He awoke to find feathers scattered on his fields, and a dead chicken nailed to his gate. The message was clear: curse bringer, diseased, danger. Still he did not leave. Where would he go? The land was his life. His wife was buried here, and his child only needed rest. A few herbs, a few more days. But the whispers grew louder than reason. A widow claimed to see black smoke rise from his chimney at midnight. A boy swore he saw Elias bury something wriggling in a sack. Every cough in town became his child's echo. Every new death another nail in his coffin. When the miller's eldest son died, purple-lipped and foaming, the town stopped whispering. It began pointing. That night, after the bells tolled for the boy, a torch was lit outside Elias's home. Then another, then 10. In the shadows, behind the flames' flicker, a vote was whispered. No hands raised, no voices shouted, just silence, consent in stillness. The farmer stood by the window, child asleep in the next room, and for the first time he realized they weren't afraid of the plague, they were afraid of him. The church bell rang not for weddings, nor for feasts, but for funerals, 3 times in a single day. Each toll echoed across the rooftops like a warning from the sky. The priest, face pale behind his robe, stood over hastily dug graves with hands trembling beneath incense smoke. There was no time for scripture. Bodies were burned, not buried, wrapped in oil-soaked cloth and lowered into pits already smoldering. Ash floated over the village like snow. The masks came next, long-beaked, bird-like, stuffed with rosemary and mint. A merchant had worn one in the capital, they said. It kept the bad air out, so the blacksmith fashioned crude ones of leather and wood. Children cried at the sight. Men wore them anyway. Eyes were no longer visible in this town. Only dark lenses, sweat and breath behind stitched bills. And still the sickness spread. Elias did not leave his home. He boiled water, burned herbs, placed damp cloths on his child's brow. He dared not show himself in town, not since the torchlight meeting beneath the moon. But the fever would not break. The cough turned wet. The child shivered even under heavy wool. Desperation finally forced him back toward the village square. Hood drawn, face hidden, clutching coin and a desperate hope, he stepped into the apothecary's yard. The door slammed before he knocked. A voice shouted from inside, "We have nothing for your kind." He turned. A stone flew past his shoulder. Another hit the ground beside him. Someone screamed. He fled back the way he came, but not before he saw the priest, high on the chapel steps, holding a book aloft. It was not a Bible. It was a ledger. Names inside, marked, crossed, judged. The next morning someone smeared blood on Elias's fence. At midday the town square filled an emergency council, called by necessity, driven by panic. The priest, his mask hanging from his neck, addressed them with fire in his voice and fear in his veins. "To save the many we must act. We know where it began. The house by the fields. Disease festers there like rot in a wound." He did not name Elias. He did not need to. The people did not shout. They did not protest. A silence fell, thicker than smoke, heavier than guilt. Some looked down, some looked away, but none said no. The vote passed without a single voice raised. To cleanse the village, the priest whispered, one must burn, and still no one stopped him. That night, Elias sat beside his child's bed. The fever had broken for a moment. Her breathing was easier. Her tiny hand gripped his. He hummed the lullaby her mother once sang. Outside, the wind stirred. He did not see the torches gathering. He did not hear the priest's quiet prayer. Not until the front gate creaked open. A knock at the door, then silence. Elias stood slowly, heart pounding. Shadow stretched across the floor. The child stirred. "Papa," she whispered. He turned to her, gently, and smiled one last time. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be right back." Then he opened the door, and the fire met him. They came at dawn. 6 men in cloaks, led by the priest. No torches yet, just ropes, just silence, not a word exchanged. The village did not need to scream anymore. Fear had matured into resolve, and resolve wore a mask. Elias did not resist. His hands were still wet from wiping his daughter's brow. He looked down at her one last time, whispered something too soft to hear, and allowed them to bind his wrists. Her tiny form lay still, a thread of breath rising from her lips. She never opened her eyes. The procession through the village was slow, deliberate. Windows shuttered one by one as he passed, like blinking eyes too ashamed to witness what they'd summoned. Children peeked through cracks, watching the man they'd once waved to in the fields, now dragged like a carcass. A dog barked once, then stopped. Even the birds were silent. At the edge of the square stood the pyre. A cross of timber had already been erected, crowned with dry straw soaked in oil. The priest walked ahead, carrying a silver cup and a book too black to be a Bible. Behind him 2 boys brought the torch, flickering, hungry, eager. Elias was fastened to the post without a word, his arms pulled tight, chest rising slowly against the rope. The sky above was slate gray, as if the heavens themselves turned away. A ripple moved through the crowd. They had come, dozens of them, some clutching masks, others barefaced with swollen eyes and hollow cheeks. Grief and guilt mingled in their throats, but none dared to speak. They had cast the vote. The fire now belonged to them all. The priest stepped forward, eyes never blinking. "You brought death to our door," he intoned. "You let the sickness in. May your soul burn clean and our village with it." But Elias didn't weep. He didn't beg. He lifted his head slowly, eyes scanning the crowd until he found her, his daughter, cradled in the arms of an old midwife near the edge. She was awake, her tiny arm outstretched, reaching for him. "Papa," she cried out. His eyes welled, but he held firm. "Be strong," he whispered. The midwife turned her face away. The torch was raised, and the priest began to pray. But Elias spoke louder. "Was it the cough," he asked, loud enough to reach them all, "or the boil on the widow's cheek, or the rat in your cellar? What sin did I commit? Was it sickness, or your fear?" The priest hesitated. The torch touched the straw. The fire caught fast. Flames raced upward, devouring the oil-soaked timber, snapping at his feet, his legs, his chest. Elias gasped once, then grit his teeth. The ropes burned before his skin did. Smoke swallowed him whole. The child screamed again. No one moved, not the priest, not the mother who once nursed her, not the blacksmith who once shared a drink with Elias in happier days. They all watched as he burned, and still the rats returned. Still the children coughed. Still the boils spread beneath the skin. 3 more were taken the following week. An old man, a washerwoman, a boy too young to speak, and once again the torches were lit. The fire spread faster than the disease, but it never cured it. One night, a stranger passing through found the town eerily still, doors bolted, crosses marked in ash. A smell lingered in the air, burnt wood, sickness, sorrow. He reached the center square. There, still smoldering, was the pyre. No body, just blackened rope. He turned to leave, and behind him the wind whispered, "Be strong." The smoke had long since faded, but the scent of it clung to every beam and stone. The village stood in eerie silence, not from peace but because there was no one left to make noise. Windows were boarded, doors sealed with crude wooden slats. Over half the homes bore black crosses, etched in ash and desperation. Wind blew through the empty streets, scattering straw and fragments of torn cloth. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. The priest's final sermon was delivered to no one. He stood at the altar of the church, gaunt, eyes sunken, robes hanging like curtains over a vanishing frame. The pews were empty. The bell no longer rang. Mold crept along the stained glass windows, and rats gnawed at the wooden rafters. Still, he spoke his Latin rites, voice cracking like dried wood, clinging to the ritual as if it would somehow cleanse the horror. But the words failed. His God was silent. He died that night, alone. The church door remained ajar for days, creaking in the wind until the storm finally slammed it shut. No one buried him. No one lit candles. His bones would later be found sprawled before the altar, mouth open in a scream that no one heard. But not all perished. The child lived. Elias's daughter survived, frail but fierce. The midwife had taken her deep into the woods, hiding in a root cellar once used for storing apples. There she fed her broth made from herbs, whispered old songs to keep her from dreaming of fire. The girl never forgot. Not the flames, not the silence of her neighbors, not the way her father's body twisted in the light, like a scarecrow dancing for judgment. Years passed. The land swallowed the village slowly. Ivy crept over cottages. The well dried up. Foxes nested in the chapel. When travelers did arrive, they spoke of a cursed hamlet where even birds refused to sing. They called it Ashvale. One summer, a band of builders came to reroute the nearby road. While digging near the old well, they unearthed a rusted chain, then bones, then a pile of masks, warped by heat, beaks like birds, cracked glass eyes, and melted leather straps. Someone found a child's slipper, singed at the heel. No one knew what they had disturbed, but none stayed the night. A historian came eventually. He found records, fragmented accounts, church receipts, lists of names, most crossed out in red ink. He uncovered whispers of a man named Elias. Some said he had brought the plague. Others claimed he had been a healer, misunderstood. The truth dissolved between the lines. All that remained was the girl's voice, recorded years later in a worn journal passed from scholar to scholar, copied and reinterpreted in modern tongues. She wrote not as a child, but as a witness. It wasn't the plague that killed them, it was fear and fire. That sentence alone would survive generations. As for the well, it remains, covered in moss, half-cracked, tilting like a broken tooth in the mouth of the forest. Children who wander too close claim they hear whispering, voices under the stone, calling for justice or forgiveness, or perhaps nothing at all. Some nights, when the wind is just right, villagers nearby say they see a glow on the horizon, like fire licking the sky. But no one dares check. Not anymore. They burned him to save themselves. They turned on neighbor and kin with the faith of zealots and the cruelty of cowards. They thought the fire would cleanse the sickness, purge the guilt. But fire does not heal. It only consumes. What they lit that day was not salvation, but the funeral pyre of their own future. The plague passed, as all plagues do. But fear builds monuments in ash, and in the center of the forest, a well still waits, deep, dark, and listening.